everybody, I am back and welcome to the FPL Family YouTube channel. Today I'm joined by the lovely Becky Ives to talk about her first draft of her FPL team for the new season. So Becky, before we get into the team, which everyone can see on the screen, tell me, how do you go about picking these? Because there's a real difference, I think, between how FPL managers go about it. Some of them kind of go, right, these are the players I must have. Some of them like to fill with premiums first. Some of them like to go with the cheap options first. So how do you do it?
Well, I think the first thing, thanks for having me, by the way, this is exciting. I think the first thing I always do, I have to say, I play fantasy, rightly or wrongly, I play fantasy with my heart over my head sometimes. And sometimes that works out for me because I feel sometimes gut is the way to go. If you have a feeling about something, I have to feel settled when I look at a team. This is my first draft, and let me tell you, at the minute I'm not quite settled, but I'm 65, 75% settled. As I say, I play it with my heart rather than the head, rather than cold hard stats. So sometimes that works great. Sometimes it really doesn't. I have a terrible game week. But the way I kind of go about building it, I think you call them premiums. I call them my non-negotiables. They're the ones that I'm like, I'm going to stick these guys in because these are my guys, and I back them 100%. And they're the guys that I've thought about for weeks, and I've got them last season. I've got there definitely. So I kind of stick those ones in first, and I go, I have to now build my team around those.
Yeah.
And I kind of build it from there. And obviously, as every player that plays this game, you end up with minus 2 million. You think, I'll change it now, and how do I do this? But I always try and stick with my 3 or 4 that I'm like, those are my non-negotiables. They're staying, and everybody else is like a little moving jigsaw.
So I'm presuming we're talking about Salah and Bruno and Kane mostly. Are they the 3 that were kind of like, right, you're in, and then let's work around you?
Okay, so yes, Harry Kane and Salah have been my non-negotiables for the last couple of seasons, to be fair. Bruno Fernandes, for me, I was a die-hard KDB girl. And I have been for a couple of seasons. And then, obviously, last season you got the injury. And even at that point, I still did not bring Bruno Fernandes in. And it became one of those things where I saw him clocking up the points every single week, and yet still I didn't bring him in. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. So I have to say Bruno Fernandes, because you also, when players come to the Premier League, we don't know how they're going to go. Some take to it like a duck to water, some don't, and some take time. You then get certain managers like, well, Pep and Ollie with Cavani, and I mean, Pep, it's like Pep roulette every time, isn't it?
It's a nightmare.
Was he going to start every game? Was he going to build up? So I just sort of sat back and waited, and I felt I really paid for that, sat back and waited. So this season, I have put my eggs in Bruno's basket, and I just think I can't not have him in. Everything at United goes through Bruno, everything.
It's funny because you saying that has reminded me of Lee last season, because Lee didn't go Kane. And he took weeks of me saying, what are you doing? Like, you can't, he kept saying, but he won't stay fit. And I was like, well, no, he likely won't stay fit. But at the minute, he's on this run, and he was like, well, I've got to destroy my whole team. And I think it's that, isn't it? That it's that kind of problem. And I'm looking at your team, and I think much of what I'm seeing is what I really should do with mine, because I know that come game week 2, 3, 4, I'm going to want Harry Kane because it's Harry Kane, and he's either going to be at Spurs and will likely do what he did last season, or he's going to go up to Manchester City, and then goodness only knows what he's going to do if he goes to Manchester City with those players around him. So looking at him, I'm thinking, well, it's pretty much going to be essential that you own Kane at some point, probably after game week 1 though, because it's looking likely he's not going to play there. So you've got him sat on your bench, mostly because we spoke before, he's going to be switched out, right? Just ahead of the deadline.
So there's still a couple of weeks of the season to go. I wanted to make sure that I built a team around him and that I had the budget in there. I knew I wanted to make sure I had the money. So for the first week, I'm going to swap him out for, probably DCL, I would say, is probably the person I'm going to swap him out for. And then, I mean, you know what's going to happen though, don't you? DCL's going to whack in a complete hat-trick, score 1 million points, triple captain, and everyone wants to keep him. And then you're thinking, oh no, who do I swap out? But at at the minute, that's my plan. I'm going to swap him out for game week 1 because we know he's not available, and then bring him back after that. And hopefully, well, fingers crossed, his future will be a little bit more well-known, let's just say.
Well, let's hope so, because it is so out there at the moment. I think, it's really difficult to tell what's going to happen. I think with Grealish, it seems a little bit more certain anyway. It feels like that one's more likely to happen. The Kane one, because they still haven't upped the offer, feels a bit like it's just sort of treading water and you can't really make a decision until you know. And of course, with the transfer window staying open beyond game week 1, that adds a whole nother dimension to the game this year that we didn't have last year. So it makes FPL that little bit more difficult, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's start with...
That's where I then go with my gut. And I just, I have to go with what I feel happy with.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to end up pretty much doing this. I can already feel myself doing it. We did our first live stream of the season on Sunday, and I was looking at my team thinking, I quite like that. But there's this gaping hole up top where I haven't got the money. Like, I've got $1 million in my bank, but I can't get from DCL to Kane with $1 million. So it's going to take it's going to take absolute steel from me to kind of go, right, I'm going for it without him, or I'm going to have to build it in, or I'm going to have to do what I never do, and that's early wildcard to make sure I've got him in. So I'm kind of got to make some big decisions in the next 2 weeks, but I think there's going to be a lot of FPL managers in the same boat too. So at least if you're thinking about Kane strategy now, that puts you in a better position than some other managers will become game week 2, game week 3, when he starts going absolutely mental, which is kind of feels like it's inevitable, really.
It's inevitable. It's Harry Kane. It's what he does. He scores goals for fun.
Exactly. Let's talk about the keepers, because this is an interesting one to me. These two are really popular in the FPL community. You listen to them kind of chatter on Twitter. Sanchez has always been popular since kind of the beginning of pre-season, well, since the game launched effectively. But Bachmann and the Watford defence seems to be growing in popularity, mostly because you can have the 2 Watford keepers for 8.5. You've done the safe bet, I think, which is have rotating 4.5s. Why these 2? Because there are other options. You've got Gaeta and people like that at Palace. Why these 2?
Okay, so originally I actually really wanted Emi Martinez, but I had to compromise because he's slightly more expensive. But obviously, Emi Martinez last season was that keeper. Everyone shipped him in. He had an amazing time at Villa. He's also just had an amazing summer with the Copa America. I feel his confidence is sky high.
100%.
So I kind of, my gut was like, oh, Emi Martinez, that would be my pick. However, when it came to them building the team around Harry Kane, Bruno and Salah, I found that wasn't actually, I had to give somewhere. So I kind of looked at the keepers. Sanchez, I always seem to have a Brighton keeper in my ranks somewhere. I think Matty Ryan featured for me quite heavily at one point. Defensively, they're at the top of the tree for the next, first couple of game weeks. For sure. Start. Look, Sam, you and I had a conversation. I think the Brighton defence, it was reliable last season because, as you said, Ben White was there. He's now gone. So, to be honest, at 4.5, he's one of those where I was like, look, I can bring him in. It's going to go one of 2 ways, but he's only 4.5.
Yeah.
So if I need to switch him, I can. I also don't want to do the double Watford and rotate. I just don't want to put all my eggs in one basket, because although Watford were fantastic in the Championship towards the end of last season, defensively, absolutely brilliant, you get to the Premier League and it's like pushing a detonator sometimes. I mean,
100% is. I remember Lee and I went to... back in 1920, we went to Liverpool to watch the Watford game where they got absolutely demolished. And that is one thing that I must say is really terrifying me at the moment, because I have gone with the 2 Watford boys in goal simply because it saves me 0.5, and I think I can use that 0.5 quite well across the rest of my team. So I've gone with that. But the thought of having to play a Watford goalkeeper against Manchester City or Manchester United or Chelsea or Liverpool, any of those clubs, you just know you're getting 2 points, maybe 1. If they get absolutely tanked, maybe they're going to get like 0. And then you think, could I be better off if I did what you've done, particularly with those Brighton fixtures early on? And there is definitely scope for it. And the issue I have with Sanchez is, if I don't go with him from game week 1, he will probably be quite popular. He might take some price, 0.1, 0.2 here, 0.2 there. And that could be difficult then in terms of buying him in, because we've already talked about how budget's difficult across the rest of the squad. So I think it makes a lot of sense to go with them both. They do rotate fairly nicely. There are a couple of games so it'll be tough to pick which one you play, because they've got a couple of nice ones together.
I'd much rather have that nice headache of going, I don't know who to pick because I've got two really good ones. Rather than going, I've picked two from the same squad and they've got an absolute nightmare of a fixture, so I'm resigned to the fact that I'm not really going to earn anything this week. So that's kind of how I view that situation. Yeah,
and I think that makes a lot of sense. I really do. There is no Liverpool defender in here. And that is the first thing, when you sent me this over yesterday and I looked at it and I thought, no Liverpool defence. Now that's interesting, because my first draft had no Liverpool defence, and then I got absolutely terrified, because you look at them and you think, like, Trent and Robbo obviously have the attacking threat that they do. Robbo obviously was away with Scotland in the Euros, but has had a break and is now back with the Liverpool team. For Trent, obviously had that injury, missed out on the Euros, but now seems to be like about twice the size he was when the season ended. Like, he seems to have gone, I don't know what he's been doing, like lifting a load of weights. And I kind of look at him and I think, with Van Dijk now back as well, that defence suddenly feels like a defence that I would want to be invested in. But you can't easily have Trent, Salah, Bruno and Kane without there being some huge compromises across the rest of the squad.
And at the minute, this is where my compromises do lie. Yes, the Liverpool defence. Look, Liverpool last season were not the Liverpool from the season before. We all know that. We all know that they had injuries.
Yeah.
Whilst Van Dijk is coming back, absolutely, I think I read somewhere that Klopp's not guaranteed he might play the first game of the season.
Yeah.
They just haven't played together for an entire season. Yeah. And I think this is my sticking point with this. I think Liverpool are going to be considerably better than what they were last season. I don't think there's even a question in that. And I'm sure come game week 4 or 5, they're going to find their momentum. I think they're going to take a couple of games to find their rhythm, get into it. They had so many defensive partnerships. What was it? They were the Premier League side with the most defensive partnerships.
It was crazy. Yeah, it was mental.
They had like Jordan Henderson slipping back into the back line. You're just thinking, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So individually, yes, Liverpool defence players are absolute world class. There's no question about it. I think just for the first couple of game weeks, I had to make a compromise. And for me, I felt that was the weakest compromise, if you know what I mean. I was like, those are the ones where I'm like, I'm not sure how it's quite going to go there. And when I had a look at the other options, I felt, okay, so I picked Luke Shaw. His price point, he's only 5.5. I was quite shocked by that. I did a double take.
Yeah. Actually, the Manchester United defence have been, in my opinion, really nicely priced this year, because you can have your pick of Shaw, Wan-Bissaka or Maguire for 5.5. And Ollie seems to be saying that Henderson's going to be first choice keeper. But even if it's De Gea, you've got one of the keepers for 5. So you can invest in that Manchester United defence quite nicely. The fixtures are just as nice as Liverpool's. So I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to go United early on in the season. I mean, from game week, I think it's game week 7, the fixtures look dreadful for them in terms of clean sheet potential. But then you've got 7 game weeks to get to that point. So most managers will have wildcarded in that 7 weeks. So for me, starting with a Manchester United defender and then moving him on maybe at game week 7 feels sensible.
That's the plan. Luke Shaw can whack in a couple of goals, raise his price point by a couple of million, and then I'll swap him out, put Liverpool defender in when we get to game week 7.
He's only got to go up. Yeah, if he goes up by 0.5, you'll be all right. You can go Van Dijk.
Exactly. So that's kind of my thinking. And, I know, will Luke Shaw play game week 1? Possibly not, because of everything. But I'm trying to look at the bigger picture, I think.
And I think that's important, because most managers kind of look to game week 1 and they have this lovely team that looks great for game week 1. And then you start looking sort of game week 3, game week 4, and you think, actually, like the Aston Villa fixtures changed quite dramatically after game week 3. Yeah, so then you're in that position where you're kind of like, well, what do I do now? Who do I go with now? Do I make some bigger changes? Do I take some points hits? Do I early wild card? So actually looking a bit more long term feels really sensible. That's how I play it. I look for, first of all, I look for game week 1, then I look to game week 5 and then to game week 8 and try and plot some things so I know roughly who I would want to bring in, but also I'm not kind of needing massive changes. And yours is nice. I mean, looking at Fofana and Lucas Digne there in the middle, they look like brilliant options for quite a long time, actually. The fixtures are really nice for them both. So I can see them both being good options. And then again, if the Everton defence isn't as solid as you think, he's at a nice price point where we can move him to anyone else fairly straightforward.
Masuaku was my choice. That's sort of the slight... I think it's a cheap option to buy into the West Ham defence, especially if David Moyes sticks with the back three this season. But I suppose he's the one out of that back line that I'm like, is there a better option? Is he? He's the one that I'm on the fence with a little bit.
See, because it's interesting, because I kind of pondered with this for quite a long time, this exact decision, because I wanted a West Ham defender and I wanted a Leeds midfielder. And so I spent a long time kind of going, what do I do? And in the end, I was like, I think I fancy Soufal to have a better season, significantly better season than I would Masuaku. Therefore, having an extra 0.5 feels quite sensible. And then I did a comparison with Rafinha and Harrison and ended up kind of going, well, there's not that much difference between those two. So I've gone Harrison, which could backfire because Rafinha's going to be hugely more popular. But for 0.5 less, I was kind of like, well, maybe actually that gives me a better defender. How many is Rafinha going to outscore Harrison by? Is he going to? Because I think that is an is he going to, as opposed to I'm definitely going to. But could that make for a better option in the West Ham defence? Yeah. Maybe. It's really tough. And I think it's those decisions that are going to be the difference in the early part of the season, I guess, is how do you spread the budget?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
All these thought processes, and this is where you swing back and forth, isn't it? Because interestingly, I had Jack Harrison for a period of time last season. And he was great for a period of time. And then he just wasn't that great for a period of time.
It's tough. So
I think because I had him, my gut this season is, well, let's try something fresh.
Yeah.
In that area.
Whereas it's interesting because I actually didn't really go with the Leeds midfield last time around because I was always a bit scared to triple up because I had Bamford pretty much the whole season. I had Dallas pretty much the whole season. So I was kind of a bit like, oh, I don't know how I feel about treble Leeds. So eventually I did end up with Rafinha and for a couple of game weeks and he did well. But equally I kept looking at Harrison, who at that moment was doing way better. Like I had the wrong one at the wrong time, which is probably why I'm a little bit more in the Harrison camp this time around. But there's so many others in that kind of price point as well. The Rafinha bracket, there's Sarr at Watford. I've got a real feeling this year about Dele Alli. I just think he's back in the fold at Spurs. He seems to be enjoying life again.
I agree with that, but for 6 million, I was like, oof. If he was down at 5, I'd be like, well, that's a no-brainer. But I feel 6 million, for me, I was like, I feel he's slightly overpriced and underproved on the field.
Well, that's the thing. So I'm going without him early on in the season on the basis that the Spurs fixtures, starts with Manchester City, and I don't really fancy investing in Spurs for that.
Yeah.
Then the next 3 fixtures are quite nice, and there's Palace in there, there's Watford in there, there's Wolves in there, so that they're quite nice fixtures for them. Those, but then there's the 2 London derbies with Arsenal and Chelsea, and I'm kind of looking at that thinking maybe it's the moment after that where I think I'll go with a Spurs option. Apart from Kane, he'll come in regardless. But with the others, I think that there's kind of decisions to make based on what Nuno does and how Spurs set up, which kind of Spurs we see. Are we going to see counter-attacking Spurs again, trying to be defensive, but are we going to see attacking Spurs? That will make a big difference to which one of the Spurs players, because otherwise there's that Reguilon who looks like a really nice option as well in the defence post-game week 1. So, yeah.
Well, that's healthy as well. I'm not going to lie. Under Nuno, I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah, I think it could be a really interesting season for Spurs. And we've got potential, I think, because we're not playing in one of the we're playing in the conference rather than in the Europa League. So because of that, I would expect to see a little bit more rotation around that competition rather than amongst the Premier League, which is where we would normally maybe see some rotation with the European football. So because Spurs don't have that this time around, maybe that means that the Premier League season actually is better because it's more of a focus for them than it has been in seasons gone by, perhaps. And then I'm looking at your front 3, obviously taking Kane into that, thinking I can't really see a front 3 that's better than that at the moment.
Yay!
Like
that makes me happy.
That, I mean, I've got Toney and Watkins, and I've got DCL at the moment because of the fixtures and because Kane's not playing game 1, but that's pretty much the front three you're probably going to start the season with anyway. Looking at that,
there's a lot of noise around Ivan Toney.
Yeah.
Brentford play Valencia next week, and I'm lucky enough to be working at that game, so I will go and see in the flesh.
Full scout.
I'm gonna go check out Brentford and see what they've got, which is very exciting. And you kind of hope that Ivan Toney is going to be the Ollie Watkins, the Patrick Bamford of previous seasons, that one diamond in the rough that's that comes to the forefront. So, but again, it's a step up the Championship to the Premier League. I think he can cut it in the Premier League massively.
Yeah.
Brentford in pre-season looked really good. West Ham last week in their pre-season, all right, they lost 1-0, but there was some brilliant. They pressed high. They press high. They're right up the field. They're attacking, and that's exciting to watch. And goals are going to come like that if they can maintain that level. It sort of in spells a little bit in West Ham, but if they can maintain that, which I think the way Thomas Frank wants to play his football, is exciting, and goals will come if they play like that. So there was this whole. I think every manager knows that the sort of pit that you pick from is Bamford, Watkins, DCL, Harry Kane, and Ivan Toney. Those are your 5, and you've just got to fit whichever ones you can in each week. I think those guys are guaranteed goals.
Yeah, I do too.
I felt like I couldn't really justify the extra 0.5 for Bamford and DCL.
It's really hard.
The first week, I would swap Harry Kane out to put DCL in, but then that money's banked.
Yeah.
And as I say, I'm not anticipating that DCL will do anything so horrendous that he loses all his value in game week 1.
Game week 1. It's difficult this though, isn't it? Because I think you're right. I think there is a very small pool of forwards that you'd actually want to invest in, and that means that you've got a set amount of budget. Now, the probably the cheapest way you can do it is to go with Watkins, DCL and Toney. There's not very many others that you could go Iheanacho, but then there's Daka there as well now. Plus you've still got Vardy, so it's very hard to know who's gonna play against. Well, who's gonna play in the Premier League, who's gonna play in the Europa League. It's very tough at Leicester this season. Plus Barnes is back, of course, now. I'm looking at this then thinking, right, Toney, Watkins, they feel like they're locks. That means that you've got then somebody else to fit in, and it's going to be a budget thing. Is it going to be DCL? Are you going to go Bamford? Are you going to go Kane? But I think they feel like the safest bets. I mean, you could go really rogue and take a punt on somebody like Josh King at 5.5, but then is he going to play? Because Watford have got so many forwards, and it's kind of like, I don't think you can pick a Watford forward on that basis. There's just too many of them. They're just going to get rotated, surely. So the safest bet, the safest cheap bet is to go Toney, and I think he backs himself. His interviews in pre-season have been phenomenal for us as FPL managers.
What a character. It's the type of interview that you want to see when you're a football fan, isn't it?
100%.
Personality, backs himself, but not to an arrogance point, just a confidence point that you just think, oh, I like you.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been brilliant. And that's the thing, I look at him and I think, that's ideal. Like, you're going to going into the season with this kind of, they asked him, I think, is he going to score 15 goals? And he was like, no, I'll get like 20. And you're kind of like, yes, that's what I want from my players. I want you going out there going, yeah, I back myself. And in the opening game of the Premier League season, which is always mental. It's never like a straightforward game. I remember like a couple of seasons ago, it was Liverpool and Leeds. It was like a bonkers game that night. And I kind of think, it's going to be crazy, isn't it? It's a London derby, Arsenal and Brentford, like, that's going to just be a great game to watch. And I can see Toney being like, here I come. Here I come, Premier League. I'm going to take you by storm.
Yeah, here I am announcing my arrival against a team that are in slight turmoil. Like, let's face it. It's like, no European football. All right, they've Ben White's joined and stuff, but he was only on the bench for their pre-season game yesterday, wasn't he? So
and they lost Partey yesterday, so that's another problem for them.
That's another problem for them. So no, I would back Ivan Toney back this week.
Yeah, I think I would too. What about the captain's armband? It's there on Toney, but I'm presuming that's just because you haven't moved it, as opposed to you're going to go.
I haven't moved it yet. It's definitely not that. No, game week 1, no brainer. Mo Salah.
Yeah.
It's against a newly promoted side, you know.
Who have sold all their players. I'm looking at Norwich thinking, you've got no one left. Like, you've sold Buendia. Looks like you're going to sell Cantwell as well, because they can't turn down 40 million for Cantwell, whatever it is they've been offered now. I'm looking at that thinking, you know, and one of their key players last year was Ollie Skip. Of course, he's come back to Spurs this season. So it's going to be difficult for them, I think, going into this season. And that Liverpool game to start the season does not feel like something that Norwich are going to contain very easily.
No, I agree with that massively. And I think for a team like Norwich, I think that's the worst possible game they could have had to start the season. You just think, oh, come on, give Daniel Farke a break. But do you know what? The one Norwich player I have gone for, and this is my gut, this is my heart, Billy Gilmour.
Yeah.
I like this transfer a lot. I like it. And I put him in there. He was cheap. We know the quality that he has.
100%.
Saw us at Chelsea. Back fully fit. I just think, and I really want him to do well.
Well, I think he will.
So
I mean, he's in my draft because I think he will do well. I think they've signed him to play him. Like they've lost key players across that squad. They're going to need that kind of youth, like excitement, that kind of drive that they bring when they come in on loan. He's going to want to do well because he's going to want to prove a point. Going back to Chelsea after the season, it's kind of like all of that stuff that Gilmour's got in his locker, I think will be really beneficial. And at 4.5, it really doesn't matter if it goes badly because most weeks you're not going to play him anyway, probably. He's probably going to be sitting on your bench with Basuma and then one of your defenders. So actually, it's kind of like you just need him to be able to come on. And whilst this run of fixtures to start the season for Norwich is awful, that does mean that there are blue skies a bit later on and we have a really nice run of fixtures for them. So he's not going to be highly owned, so he's not going to cost you anything in terms of he's not going to go down in price. Nobody's going to sell him like in the same way that they might with some of the others if they have a bad start to the season. So I think Gilmour is definitely the way to go, knowing that if Norwich somehow manage to actually start the season well, given the fixtures that they have, then you can easily move towards them and you've got players like Pukki who can eventually become somebody that you might want to go to when the fixtures change for other people.
Yeah, my ideal would be that Billy Gilmour gets a hat-trick the first week, so I've got no Liverpool defence and I've got a Norwich midfielder. So that's what I'm praying for game week 1.
Amazing. Becky, thank you so much for coming to talk to me about your team. Good luck with the rest of your kind of summer of tinkering with this lot. And
yeah, I know. It's one of those things, isn't it? Like, I will still be tinkering 5 minutes before that deadline. I'll be going, is this right? Oh, goodness. And then it's just going to pass and I'm going to have to be satisfied with it. But yes, that's my basic at the minute. Maybe 1 or 2 might change, but that's, pretty much there.
And I actually think that for a first draft, like sometimes when I look at first drafts, I think, oh my gosh, what on earth has happened here? This one has got, with the exception of the Liverpool defence, it's got pretty much everything else that you would want in there. Maybe it's missing a middle priced midfielder, but equally, you've got those big 3 names, and if you've got them, that's half the battle.
I will take that from you, Sam. FPL expert, I'm grinning like a Cheshire cat.
Hooray!
I've got that right. Yay. Oh, amazing. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
So
Amazing.